I am here with Kamikaze Jones, multidisciplinary artist, songstress, chanteuse, writer, shocking artist, sexual crafter, ritual creator. How's that sound?
This all sounds pretty accurate, I would say.
Good.
I'd like to fashion myself as like an erotic chanteuse. So,
I'm interested. So if we wanted to like get to know you, what are some of like your biggest heroes or references that you can recall?
ooh, I think it depends on the medium, but
Well, for you,
yeah.
the range will really show the range of mediums that you pull from will also be a reflection of you. So,
Yeah, I think in the literary field, like Clarice Lispector and like Jean Genet are very important to me. I think in the musical field, the artist Diamanda Galas, really important to me, and a lot of, ambient music, queer noise music, like a lot of that stuff is good. Artists that work with ritual, always really exciting to me. And I also draw a lot of my work from like queer erotic archives. So the work of sex workers is always like at the forefront of my mind, and
yeah,
people who engage with that in kind of ways that trouble like power dynamics and like kind of like predominant histories of sex work are always pretty generative for me.
if that's a type of research that you're interested in, that's usually one of the few people like digging in there to get this information. Do you find a lot of new territory that maybe like other artists aren't working with?
I hope so. I mean, like, I think that I'm interested in like pornographic affect and not necessarily like, I think the residue of like the erotic archive is really fascinating and how it like kind of implants itself or projects itself onto like, different social and creative spheres that people wouldn't think are necessarily connected. And I think a lot of artists work with like the raw visual material of the erotic archive. And I'm like very fascinated with using the sonic materiality of it. And I kind of like considering my practice like a counter archival impulse. So interstitial like work, like archival necromancy is a phrase that I've been using a lot. I like taking like kind of like the sonic affect of like, like music from porn and kind of reappropriating it or reclaiming it or like using it for ritual work. Because I feel like there's a lot that is unsaid in that sound that can map onto various other public and private spheres, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I love the idea of archival necromancy. Thinking about your work and the idea of ritual, because ritual usually I associate it with like a means to an end or reaching towards something rather than
Mm-hmm.
experimentation for experimentation's sake. So how does that show up in your work? Where do you think you're reaching towards?
Ooh, I think it's really ambivalent. I think that the ritual, like I just did a piece last week that I've done a couple of times in various incarnations, and I knew that the meaning of it had changed a bit, but I didn't know exactly how. And it wasn't until like halfway through the performance that I feel like I arrived at the clarity of what it's conveying. And that's always really exciting to me because I feel like I have like kind of like subconscious impulses that reveal themselves in the fullness of time. And that's like always been a really enriching part of my artistic practice, is to not exactly know, but to like trust the intuition and like let it materialize in the way that it sees fit. So like actually this past year, a lot of the ritual work that I've done or performance work I've done has been a bit ambivalent and kind of like simultaneously like a conjuring or banishing of certain things. I'm not sure if you're familiar with like that that news clip or that meme where it's like Demi Lovato like sings to like ghosts about trauma, but like a lot of friends of mine that are like familiar with my work, like I had like six people send me that like on one day, and I was like, okay, guess that's what's going on.
You're a copycat of Demi Lovato's work.
I know. I mean, she really is just like a very positive influence on everything that I do.
The idea of setting up systems where you don't know what the result is going to be, or you don't know why it's important yet, but you're pulling in things that feel that they speak to each other. So when the ritual is enacted, it kind of the purpose kind of discovers itself. Uh,
Yeah, it's not necessarily without intention. Like there is like maybe like a field of like potential intentions. And
mhm.
then I think someone recently described my work as like kind of like queering the notion of the siren, or like this idea of like I think there's like a lot of like camp fatalism in what I do. So it's like sometimes unintentionally funny, but like not in a bad way, not in a way that I feel like is a failure.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe helps for the more object components of what I'm doing to resonate more. But I do always feel like there's like some sort of extended vocal technique or experimental vocalization is like front of most of what I do outside of like my more like archival like sound collage and like sound art based practice. But
Mhm.
there's always kind of like this idea of like beckoning, inviting, like singing to shipwreck, or like creating sanctuary for like like unvoiced spirits in what I do.
Yeah. That is beautiful.
Oh, thanks.
Walk us through what happened in your last the last piece you were just talking about. Can you give like a brief description of
Yeah, I could. The piece is basically me in a sailor outfit. And I recently did this at Center for Performance Research, and I had kind of a like a beach chair on one side of the stage, and then an inflatable palm tree that like serves as like a beer cooler on the other side. And it's kind of a triptych. So in the first part, I'm like wordlessly vocalizing over the sound of like crashing waves, and then I proceed to go center stage and deep throat a bunch of rotten bananas that I prepared while singing Someday My Prince Will Come, like the old Disney song. I think it's Snow White. And I get really messy and I get covered in like rotten banana matter. And I'm surprisingly good at deep throating these rotten bananas while singing, which is something that I wasn't expecting because I was practicing on hard, perhaps more erect bananas. And when I'm finished making a mess of myself and like exploring that kind of like psychic space, I cross to the beach chair and I sing this song, Courtyard by Bobby Gentry, but I'm also chugging half a bottle of 99 bananas the entire time. And that will get you obviously pretty drunk pretty fast. But in the sense that I didn't really realize until like I was on the Metro North home covered in like goop. I got a lot messier than I expected. Like I put the sailor outfit away, but like I was commuting, so I was still picking stuff out of my ears, and like like banana goop kind of like coagulates, so it's just kind of you're peeling parts off for the rest of the night. Oh yeah, so that piece basically, I thought when I was remounting it or like kind of restaging it that it was kind of like a cynical take on Fire Island and like being perceived and like these like kind of like gay hotspots, and also about like colonial extraction. I think like the idea of a rotten banana and like rot and prioritizing rot, especially with like like the sex drive, is really fascinating to me. Also like the idea of the sailor is like kind of a pornographic stock character is
mm,
really interesting to me, and mixing these elements and like kind of like these archetypes with like non-traditional vocalization or like the zombification of certain songs and like the public imaginary is always really fascinating to me, and seeing what those connections could be and like those dissonances could be. And it kind of like ultimately revealed itself to be a piece about like addiction, which is like something that is also pretty present kind of ubiquitously in my work, but also more about this idea of like the hungry ghost in Buddhism and like this kind of insatiable need or
mm,
lack,
mm.
um, and the various stages of trying to find a way to commodify that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also fun to like kind of because you have like Cersei too. I think you have like this idea of like like being lured to one's death, but I think there's something complicated about making the sailor the arbitrator of that action. I think maybe something a bit like pastiche or a bit like innately camp to do so, like in like a Halloween sailor outfit,
Yeah. So I had to describe that because one thing I think you do really well, and I wonder how consciously you're thinking about it, is you're confronting shame with such like courage. I wonder if is that an active thing that you're um, working against? I guess like deep throating bananas in front of like an audience, getting messy. Lesser artists would hesitate to use those kinds of like shocking aesthetic choices. But you seem to kind of approach these things so freely that I've never heard you talk about that being uh part of it, but it is.
I suppose that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It feels kind of like, I mean, I haven't really like thought about like that part feels the most effortless. And I also like this idea of like elegant transgression and like how that rubs up against something like camp sensibility, because I love the idea of like singing beautifully in the most like abject or like compromising or humiliating tableau. I think that's
Mhm.
really, I love that interplay. And that's something that always makes like natural sense to me, is to kind of like subvert the connotations on both sides of that spectrum. I don't know. I mean, like, I guess this year I've had like a lot of like, I mean, I did do that piece with the chugging the urine out of the golden chalice, and that felt pretty just like no sweat, you know? Like that didn't feel, but that also felt like the least I could do. And maybe that's like, I'm not sure if I've done anything on stage this year that feels like an actual like, yeah, I just don't think that like there's not a lot of the work that I do feels natural and like not like I have to like force myself to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um
You talked about like subversion and transgression, and I was wondering if you're not approaching these things with a consciousness of shame or a consciousness of this is something out of the ordinary or humiliating. Are you interested in a world where the rituals you're performing are not considered transgressive or subversive, that they're just like a part of how to experience life? Or is it important to be subversive and transgressive?
I agree with the latter. I think I'm on that side of things. It's like, you know, when you go to like when you're like hanging out with straight friends for the first time in a while and like you have to say something incendiary because you get bored really easily.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
You're like, let me throw some cayenne pepper in this real quick and see what.
yeah, that's been happening more and more to me. And I feel like I used to have a lot more fluency with like kind of like comporting myself for those spaces. And now I get my patience just wears thin faster and faster. And I think I am on the side of things that is like I want queerness to be radical and subversive, and like I think homonormativity is annoying and boring, and like I think there should always be a provocation to like jar people out of complacency, and I think that's an exciting part of what I like to do, and that's why I think kind of attaining work that holds space for traditional beauty and then eviscerates it or transmogrifies it
Mhm.
is ever important to me.
It sounds like there's potentially something healthy. I don't want to be too prescriptive, but there might be something healthy to if your body is performing these like uh works of art that are transgressive and subversive, but you're not considering your actual personhood part of the subject, which is why you don't feel the shame or you don't feel like you're putting your personal self in these like potential spaces of like humiliation mentally. That seems like a healthy potential barrier. Does that sound
I think it's very personal, but I think there's always like a filter of like some sort of archetype or like
right?
vessel or character.
Yeah.
Um, and I would even hesitate to use the word character because like I think I really thrive in kind of like illegible spaces or like spaces that are encrypted.
Mm,
Um, and like I think that could be stylistically, I think that could be conceptually or methodically. I think even in like my written work or my sound work, I'm really interested in like work that prioritizes like rhetoric or like logic or practicality or
mhm.
clarity can often be a bit dull for me. Not always, but I think there's a really rich territory of like trafficking in the somatic or the wordless or the nonverbal that I think is like uniquely queer. That
Mm.
is always really exciting for me and also not didactic and open to having a somatic effect on people. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's well said. It's a complicated relationship that you've established with your work. That's like I think important to be able to put yourself in such a vulnerable space. So it's interesting to hear you talk about it.
It's funny because the two major performance pieces that I've done this year, I've gotten like really sick afterwards. So I guess I am literally making myself very vulnerable. But I also do a lot of work that prioritizes bacteria. So
All part of
yeah,
it.
I'm building my immune system piece by piece.
Yes, that's the long con of the project.
That's the real work.
That's the real work. So I know that you do a lot of fellowships or retreats. You kind of take different offerings. I feel like one of the skills that you must have to be able to do that is being able to talk about and adapt what's happening in your practice for different circumstances. So I'm thinking about writing about your practice. Uh, can you talk about your relationship to writing and your performance work? And we've now heard you talk, so I get a sense that you are very familiar with the language that accompanies your work, but I would like to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like I like to see it as a game, and like I do love it more than other people like describing their own work. And it's fun for me, but I'm also like coming from a background of like culture writing and like arts journalism and curation.
Hmm.
And I feel like those practices have like kind of like informed each other in really enriching ways. I'm still learning. It's so this year was kind of like a beautiful fluke where I just like got like a lot of opportunities kind of one after the other. And then, um, and like, yeah, I don't know. I think it's always changing. I think you have to like sadly commodify yourself for institutional recognition and like kind of like be good at schmoozing and playing the game. And like, then there's other people who are really good at like ignoring that and just like focusing on the work and letting it speak for itself. I'm not saying there's like a right or wrong path. I just really enjoy contextualizing my work in kind of like and writing about it. Like I don't really journal or anything about it. And like also a lot of people who like speak or write about my work or have in the past have like been able to tease out things that wouldn't even think of. That's always really exciting to me. But yeah, I love writing an artist statement. I think it's a lot of fun.
Like you're right that it does make you reconsider what you're doing. If you have times in your life where you need to step back and articulate to someone else what your craft is about, you hear things that you like otherwise wouldn't have considered if you stay only in the experience of making.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think they're like entwined disciplines and that they like kind of like feed each other. I don't know. What's your take on this? Like, because you're a writer and also a performer, so it's like, do you feel like I don't, do you feel like you hate writing about like your practice?
So you brought up the idea of like making it feel like a game. I think there's the element of like finding something that you like about the process of like applications or finding something you like about answering these questions that's going to be maybe different for every person, but I think you wouldn't do it unless you found something pleasurable out of the experience. So um I like writing artist statements because where I am now in my like working on a manuscript, one of the questions I've been asked about the state that it's in now is where can we see the drive of the poet, like what's driving this book, is something that people are saying, like I see all these poems but what's actually driving it. If I have to fill out applications or like do artist statements, I start to develop a thesis of what the work's about, and then I can either use some of that language directly because I don't mind chopping and screwing like prose into another form, but it just is a good way to be like, what am I doing with this project? I have all this raw material. How can I look at it in a bigger picture? And then how can I translate it to people beyond people like my own head? How can I make it make sense to um, my parents and my dance studio friends and my fellow poets in academia? Like, how can I frame it so that it speaks to all of them? The same material can speak to all these audiences. Who am I trying to include? Who am I trying to like? Who don't I want in? If it takes someone else from the outside to answer those questions, to ask those questions to get to those places, I think it's more than the raw material itself, I think.
I love a prompt, and I think a lot of the
Mhm.
times that I've been the most successful is when there's like kind of like a site specific or like there's like a specific call for and I love working within those constraints. I love a constraint, I love a prompt. I
Yeah,
think I've been less successful when it's just like an open call. Like the theme this year is party. um,
but that's actually a really good prompt.
yeah, yeah, no, that's true. That's true. I think
That's
I've been more. I guess what I mean to say is like I've been less successful in like open calls that don't necessarily have a theme or like a unifying principle.
Yes.
Um
Hmm.
yeah, it's also just like to talk about like, the intersection of like art and commerce and art and labor, like it's just so dizzying. And I feel like a lot of the time I am compelled to like, like seek opportunities where I'm going to be like compensated. So like that's very important. And like that's not like the only like impetus for like creating new work, but like, I think everyone as like a struggling artist like these days, if you don't have like, like financial support, like you kind of like have to do what's going to be the best for you, like creatively as well as materially.
Yeah,
um
it makes you have to look at your work as more adaptable and fluid, um, less static. Uh,
yeah, thrifty.
50. uh,
Scrappy.
scrappy, a little scrappy art. I guess one of the last things is if you had to give advice for people who are, I would say adapting their work into writing or like being able to talk about their work, is there like tips that you would give someone based off of like the conversation we just had?
Oh, that's a good question. I love playing like fake publicist for everyone that I know, like especially when I believe in their work.
Tell me,
uh
that sounds fun.
Oh, well, I think it's like circumstantial, like, and it really depends on the artist and like what their goals are. But I think like you can like kind of like try to take an objective perspective and be like, how can we be more concrete about this? Like, what about your practice is gonna like appeal to this place or like shoot through? Um, I don't know. I think a lot of people have trouble talking about their work and like metabolizing it in a way where they can like take some critical distance from it to like
Mhm.
present it. And like I think everyone struggles with that. But even when I was joking with you about your book, I was like, we need a full photo essay, you with an octopus, like
Yeah. And it's so easy to do for other people, and then you like have to do it for yourself, and you're like, I don't know nothing about that. Like, that's so strange. But yeah, like so being a fake publicist, even for yourself, or like develop a character that can talk about your work in a way that you wouldn't might actually be helpful.
Yeah, we need like a shot of you like eating squid at a sushi restaurant.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
well, I feel like it would need to be like the full octopus, which I wouldn't. That's a that was like I don't
Yeah, that's
what
ethically
I'm about.
naughty, but like in a perfect world, if there was like, you with a fake octopus, like writing with the tentacle ink, like your
I also don't
manifesto,
know. Can't I be scared of that too? Like I don't know if I want to eat a whole octopus. I feel
Yeah,
like
you should be scared.
yeah,
That's what's gonna make it so appealing
part of it.
to but
Right.
yeah, it's and like I do like think the framework of like a game or like kind of like a puzzle is always really fun for this kind of stuff. And it helps to make the process perhaps a bit less intimidating.
Yeah. Anything else? Are you working on anything that you'd like us to know about?
Yeah, I've been working on this very masochistic sound piece that I think is going to debut via Shortcuts, which is an audio documentary and like sound collage program that is run by BBC4. And it's a piece that I've been doing a lot of research the past couple of months, compiling sonic ephemera from conversion therapy propaganda, which has been
Mhm.
very taxing.
Yeah.
And kind of like dealing with that raw material, especially like a lot of like YouTubers who speak in tongues, a lot of like conversion therapy camp, like kind of like media indoctrination. There's like a particular like teleplay or like radio play that's meant for children that's produced by Focus on the Family that like deals with the idea of like gay marriage in a very kind of like vaguely insidious way that I've been listening to a lot lately. So yeah, that's coming out like I think in November.
Yeah, that sounds a little taxing.
It's been one of the more masochistic projects I've worked on in a long time. Like staying up until 4 in the morning every night listening to like the Westboro Baptist Church parody songs is like not the most fun.
Yeah. Are you doing things to like take care of yourself in the meantime while you're working?
Oh, I don't. I'm kind of bad at self care. I mean, every performance I do, I get sick. I need like kind of like a self care like consultant.
Make that like a fake job too, like the fake publicist. Like take a step back. What would you tell yourself to like feel better?
Yeah. Well, I kept joking that I was going to get a colonic, but then that never really materialized.
That feels like a small part of the whole. There's other ways to tackle that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're probably right. But
Now you could start with the colonic, but you can do that. So
apparently it's a whole big deal. You have to get like cleared and like, like screened, and they they have to see your credentials.
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for all that information about colonics and
Of course, anytime.
but thank you for speaking with us. It's really a pleasure to get to know your process more intimately and just hearing you speak about this work that's like not represented, that's hard to find really. To speak with someone to talk about it so intelligently is really just a privilege for me. So it's great to talk to you as always.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for having me.